Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cammie Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager.
When Lindsay Pinchuk sold her company, everyone assumed she had become a multimillionaire. The truth was far more complicated, and for years, she wasn't allowed to say so. In this episode of Money Tales, we talk with Lindsay, a former ad sales executive turned accidental founder who built a national community for new parents. She ultimately sold her business under conditions that looked very different from the outside. Lindsay opens up about the unseen money realities behind entrepreneurship, selling a company, and charting a new path, helping other founders.
Here are 3 key money topics you'll hear in this conversation. First, the transition from a lucrative corporate job to a bootstrapped startup, including the lifestyle shifts, financial trade-offs, and creative ways Lindsay supported early motherhood without a steady paycheck. Second, the emotional and financial strain of a business sale that didn't match public perception, and the challenge of staying silent under a non-disclosure agreement while navigating the aftermath. And third, how Lindsay now guides women founders to grow sustainably with low-cost foundational marketing and by reinvesting with intention instead of overspending on complex tools and strategies. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Lindsay Pinchuk's Money Tales.
Welcome, Lindsay Pinchuk, to the Money Tales podcast. We're excited to be talking with you today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I was reading a recent study that referenced there are 300 billionaires out there in the world. 300.
That's a lot of money in aggregate.
Yeah. And a third of them are inherited billionaires. That's where the source of the wealth. And it just got me thinking, Sandy, about relationship with money, whether you earn it and you inherit it or marry into it, whatever the source might be. And we've heard from a lot of guests, their relationship with money does depend on the source. I think of John Anderson, who talks about he needed a purpose. You know, he'd married into wealth and he needed purpose. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, and working with clients, and lots of our clients have built their wealth, and then we serve their children or adult children, and they might have inherited. I'm curious, how have you seen the relationship to money evolve depending on the source, whether it's made or inherited?
I think there can be a difference in one's relationship with money based on the source, but I think also what really matters is one's wealth identity, how they're identifying and relating to the wealth. For folks who create wealth themselves, they, in my experience, often gravitate toward the values that they grew up with and apply that to their wealth, which is wonderful, but sometimes it holds them back from using their money in ways in which they really, really want to use it. That could be something that we explore with clients and help them through. On the inherited wealth side of things, and we do work with some inheritors who come to us once they have inherited wealth, that experience also has a range. And I would say a lot of it depends upon if and how the family was talking about wealth before the inheritance occurred. So let me say a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Some families are really great about talking about money and setting expectations for the rising generations of their family about what they should expect, what they shouldn't expect, and what's expected of them. And in those situations, I have found that the inheritors of wealth are more prepared. They tend to have the skills and competencies that they need. If those conversations about money didn't happen within the family, again, depending upon the family's values, sometimes inheritors can feel a little lost. I've seen situations where they're feeling, well, why me? This wealth feels like a burden.
Guilt.
It could be guilt or it could be just other discomfort. So there's a really wide range. I hate to stereotype because I think everyone's situation is different. I can tell you, though, that society has a particular point of view. And most of society and the press, will treat people of wealth, whether they created it themselves or whether they inherited it, they treat them as if they've been lucky if they're different, that all of their problems are solved. And
yes, they shouldn't have problems. Yeah,
that's not true. Money is a great tool. It allows people to do many things, but it doesn't solve all problems.
You still have the human experience. I think we should move on to Lindsay, but there's another conversation around the expectations you referenced that, expectations around wealth can have its challenges as well, right? It can hold people back. And so what you underscored is by talking about it, both parties can then raise what are their concerns around the expectations, if there are any, or if there's any need for clarification. Sometimes it's just clarification. That's all it is. No one's trying to hold things over you, but it just need to answer and talk more about it.
Exactly.
Well, it's our pleasure, Lindsay, to bring you into this conversation. Would you introduce yourself briefly and share a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that really influenced who you are today?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And that conversation was very interesting. I will say, people, like when I sold my company, everyone assumed I became like this multi-mega millionaire, and that was anything but the case. And so it's interesting when you say about people's perceptions, because a lot of times they don't know.
They don't know. If we're not talking about it, that can be really hard to navigate.
Yes, it was very hard to navigate because I actually was under a lot of contracts and I wasn't really allowed to talk about it. And I couldn't really say like, no, that's not what happened and that's not where I am. And people just like assumed that like I came into this like wealth of money. And yes, I got paid for my company, but it was not what I should have received.
I'm wondering how that made you feel with people expecting that you made more money than you actually did. How did that land on you?
I was embarrassed at first because I really didn't. I didn't really share the ins and outs of the sale of my company. I couldn't, and because I was tied to all these, NDAs and everything. I was also I was abused by the company who bought me, and they were definitely in breach of their contract, and that was a reason why I didn't receive the full earnout. And I couldn't really talk about it. And so I just kind of like, when people made assumptions, I just kind of like nodded and whatnot. And it really wasn't until the last year or so that I have actually started talking about it because those contracts are up and I'm allowed to talk about whatever I want to talk about now.
Hooray for that.
This is going to be a great conversation. It already is, Lindsay.
To answer your question, a couple pivotal things that have led me to become the person I am today. Right out of college, I started a job in magazine ad sales. I was actually hired to work in advertising by the Leo Burnett agency. I was like the only graduate from Michigan my year that was hired. And because of the economic downturn, I was supposed to actually start my job on September 10th, 2001. But our jobs were removed and pushed back long before that. Like that summer, they took our jobs away. And I ended up kind of being in a situation where I interviewed for a job at Sports Illustrated for Kids. I had always wanted to work in magazines. I didn't realize that ad sales was an option to work at a magazine and also make so much more money than working on the editorial side. And I started that job about 6 months later. And I had a really amazing career in ad sales. I was actually sharing with some friends this week because they were asking me, how did you travel so much? And I said, well, I had this incredible career where I was like 23, 24, 25, and I was making six figures, like a lot of six figures. And we were able to travel because of it. And it's one of those careers that no one really ever talked about and doesn't exist the way it used to. And so I did that job. I loved that career. I did it for about 10 years. I worked for some of the biggest brands in the world, Good Housekeeping, Redbook, MTV, Nickelodeon, Sports Illustrated. It was amazing. And then I kind of accidentally started my own company. I was pregnant. I was looking for a community, and I started hosting events. And it really filled me up in a way that nothing else did, even though I loved my job, which I did. I started hosting events for expectant moms. I had my daughter. During maternity leave, I had a really good sleeper. My second one wasn't, so no one can hate me for that. But my first one was. So I was able to really get the company off the ground. And I ended up going back to work. And when I got back to work, I had a new boss that started right before my maternity leave. She was like a recent divorcee and she didn't have kids. And she was not very nice to me. She found out that I had this side hustle. Many people at Hearst had side hustles, and she made it very difficult for me. And I decided that I was going to leave and pursue this opportunity to own my own business. It was one of those things that I said to myself, like, what's the worst that happens? And the worst that happens is it doesn't go anywhere and I'll get a new job. And so the follow-up question to that is, well, can you live with that? And I could.
Even financially, right? Because it sounds like you were very financially successful.
Yes, but I was just going to say that we made a lot of changes when I made that change. So, I mean, because all of a sudden I wasn't bringing in a salary anymore and I had a nanny. And so I had to make my nanny part-time, and we gave up a lot of different things. Now, in addition to eventually I paid myself, but it took a couple of years. But you have to remember, I was in the parenting and baby space. I didn't pay for a single thing for my child. Like, I mean, I was working with every brand under the sun. I got free car seats, free strollers, free formula, free diapers. I mean, really and truly. So free photography. So it was one of those things that even though I wasn't taking a salary, I was in fact covering the expenses of a very big part of this new life stage of mine. So I started this company. I never looked back. I grew the company to eventually reach 3 million people per month. We were doing events in 15 to 20 cities around the country. We were working with Target and Nordstrom, and we had all these huge sponsors. We were generating 7 figures per year. And I was approached in 2018 for sale. And I knew I wanted to sell the business. I knew I had a shelf life, like someone who is, approaching their 40s and not a new mom anymore really has, in my opinion, no business telling people what stroller and car seat to use. They're not using it anymore. It felt very disingenuous. I ended up selling the company, and I worked for them for a couple of years. It was a very abusive relationship. They were, like I said earlier, very much in breach of their contract, but they were a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and they knew that I wasn't going to sue them. If I did, I would have really kind of lost all the money that I did actually get.
And legal fees. That is the problem.
And legal fees. Mm-hmm. It would have been a huge nightmare. It was a nightmare as it was. And so I ended up staying on for about 2.5 years, and I decided, it was interesting. It was during COVID. All of our events moved online. I actually saved this deal that we had with Target that was supposed to be an in-store, in-person, in 300 store event series that was supposed to take place on March 20th, 2020. I saved it and turned it online, and we ended up more than saving the revenue, but it was kind of too late for me to meet the potential for my earnout. I felt like I was working for someone and there was no upside for me. I was like, I have to get out of this. And funny enough, I was riding my Peloton a lot during COVID, and I was riding with my now very good friend, Jen Sherman. And Jen, at the time, I didn't know her, but her mantra is just fucking do it. And so she would be sharing these things on the bike. And I was like, I fucking have to leave this company. I am being abused. I am being raked over the coals. And so I decided to leave. It took about 6 to 8 months with lawyers and trying to figure things out before I was able to end up leaving. But when I left, my goal and my mission was I want to make sure that I can help other women to build their own businesses, very much like I did, organically, bootstrapping, without raising money. I didn't do any of that, and find success financially for themselves. And so I left, and I started a podcast called Dear Found Her. And now I work with women small business owners over 40, both in a mentorship capacity and in a consulting capacity, to help them find success, whatever that means, in their own business. And that's what I do now. And it's really been the most amazing part of this journey. I feel like I am helping so many more people. Even though Bump Club, I helped so many women become moms, and that was amazing too. But this is even greater than that. And it just, watching these women and their businesses transform and become successful, and watching women who never imagined having their own businesses, now they're, bringing in money for their family, and also they're filling a piece of themselves up that they never thought was possible, has been really and truly the most amazing part of all of this. People ask me all the time if I regret what happened with Bump Club, and I don't, because that is the story that led me to be able to do this.
I love those. Like you don't get to pick and choose certain things, like these pieces of the tapestry all hang together. Lindsay, you talk about being very successful. You made it seem like anybody who goes into magazine ad sales is successful. And I know that's not the case. And then you are an entrepreneur who's very successful. Tell us, when you were growing up, how did you learn these business skills? Were you exposed to money as a kid, and were you talking about it with your parents? How did you learn, and how did you become this thriving entrepreneur?
It's interesting because we didn't really talk about money that much in my family, but my dad was self-employed. And so I did watch my dad have his own business. And when I think about my dad, who luckily, I still have my dad, but when I think about he doesn't work anymore though. When I think about my dad and his business, one of the things that comes to mind about him was always just how he knew everyone, and he was networking, and he was always shaking hands, and he talked to everyone. And now we kind of we roll our eyes, we're like, Dad, the checkout person at the supermarket doesn't want to talk to you. He talks to everyone. And that was kind of a skill that really I picked up. And, I am a connector. I am a schmoozer. I can talk to anyone. And I do. And I ask a lot of questions. And I think that is a very big part of both my career in ad sales and my career as an entrepreneur. I mean, you also have to be confident, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there, and you have to be willing to take rejection. I mean, my dad also always taught me, you always have to ask for the order. What's the worst that happens? They say no. And then that's it. That's it. When I was interviewing for jobs out of college and I was going into sales, my dad said to me, at the end of the interview, you have to say, is there anything else that you need from me? Is there anything else I can address? And if they say no, you have to say, well, then can I have this job? And I did that at my first job interview at Sports Illustrated for Kids. And I now know, because I'm close with my then boss, now friend, Sally Moulton. Shout out to Sally for giving me my first break. That impressed her. I was 21 years old or 22 years old, and I asked for the job. And that is a skill that I carried with me throughout my entire sales career and as an entrepreneur. And so I don't necessarily know that it was talking about money.
Yeah, it demonstrates some really important skills, because it's not just the ask. You knew how to connect through these conversation skills that are so priceless. You're curious. And then you finish the sentence though, you ask for the opportunity, which is so important.
Yeah, good on you for taking advice from your parents. Not everyone is willing to do that, especially as a young adult. Lindsay, I'm curious about the time when you were starting your business. It sounds like you're married. I'm wondering what your conversations with your spouse were at that time, because it was a big pivot, as you've already discussed. How are you guys talking about the pivot and getting yourselves prepared financially for it?
Thankfully, we have always been good savers. And it was kind of one of those things that we said, let's give it a try. My husband has always been very supportive of me and my entrepreneurial ventures. And it was kind of and if it doesn't work, I'll go back and get a job. My husband has a wonderful job too, thankfully. And I think too, we knew that our life was going to change a little bit. We had a brand new baby. We weren't traveling overseas. We weren't doing a lot of the things that we used to do. And I think the biggest thing that we did when I decided to make this change was we had this full-time nanny that we were sharing with another family. And we cut down our days to 3 days. I guaranteed her 3 days with the option of adding the other 2 when I needed to. It was very quick that I started using her 4 and then 5 days. It was one of those things that we just kind of said, we'll look at it in the first year and we'll see what happens. My daughter was born in October. And so when I made this decision, it was January. And so we were like, let's just see what happens and where it goes. The goal for the first year was for my business to pay for the nanny, which at the time was not very much because it was a part-time nanny. And I more than tripled that in the first full year of me doing Bump Club on my own. And, I think it was just one of those things that it was also providing me time with my child. And that was something that was very important to my husband and I. We were both traveling a lot, and because my husband is in ad sales too. And so we were both traveling a lot, and it just felt like we would have to get a lot of extra help because we live in Chicago and none of our family lives here. And so it afforded me the opportunity to go to classes with my child, to do things with her. I wasn't always there, but I was able to make my own hours. And there really is not a price that you can pay for that. If you're able to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because becoming an entrepreneur when you have been working in the corporate world can be a really hard transition. A lot of people are afraid to take that risk, especially as they're starting a family and having additional financial responsibilities. So I'm so glad you did it. I'm so glad it worked out. And I want to fast forward now to when you decided to sell the company. It sounds like you knew the timing was right. I'm sorry to hear that the company that you sold to didn't create a great experience for you, but how were you deciding on the correct partner at the time? What sort of process did you go through, and what were you thinking about from a money perspective relative to other considerations related to the sale?
So it was interesting. Like, before I even went through the process of who is the partner going to be, I knew I wanted to sell or get investment for a couple of reasons. One, I just was tired of bootstrapping. I was just so tired. I was paying myself, but I had 10 employees. And there were definitely times when I would not run myself a payroll. And, I think a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes are scared to not have enough money in the bank, and especially at the end of the year. And we were doing events and they cost so much money. And it felt so stressful and unpredictable. And I wasn't running this regular payroll that I knew that I was going to bring home X amount of dollars. Granted, when you have your own business, you can write off a lot of things. I was in the parenting and baby space, like I said, so a lot was given to me. I was getting a lot of free stuff, but you can't pay your rent or your mortgage with free stuff. There was just a lot of things, and I just was so tired. I was working round the clock, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I knew that I really needed to find a partner. And I knew we had a really good business. We were working with Target. We were working with Nordstrom. I had all these employees. Every baby brand wanted to work with us. So I decided that I really wanted to sell the business by the time I turned 40. And so when I turned 38, I hired this fractional CFO to help me, Michelle. When she came on, our goal was simply to get the business in a place where I had a story to tell, and we could start creating a deck to take out to people. That summer, I had 3 entities reach out to me through LinkedIn to potentially purchase my company. It was very weird. We were 8 years old at this time. And we were working with Target really heavily, getting a lot of press. I was on TV a lot. I was, in the news a lot. So the first company that reached out to me was the company that I ended up selling to, and I'll kind of circle back to that in a minute. And then the second company I knew was not going to be a fit. I just knew it was not the right opportunity. And the third company, funny enough, was called Some Spider. And they're the company who bought Scary Mommy. For those of you who are familiar with Scary Mommy, it's a huge platform for moms that my friend Jill Smokler actually started. And I wasn't friends with Jill at the time. I knew her. She knew me, but we didn't know each other. And when they approached me, I thought it was a really great opportunity. And I was going to go to New York and meet with them. And they wanted me to sign an NDA. And it ended up that they wanted an acqui-hire. So they basically wanted to hire me and dissolve my brand and not take my team. And they wanted me to start an events division for Scary Mommy. And I didn't want to do that. Not that Scary Mommy didn't have brand equity. They did. But I already had my own brand identity. Bump Club was very prominent in the baby and kids space. I didn't need to start over from scratch. And also, I didn't need to start over from scratch with a team I didn't know. So I knew right away, I canceled my flight. They reimbursed me for it. They were actually so great about the whole thing. And so I pursued this conversation with Advantage Marketing, who ended up buying me. And they wanted me for my Target relationship. They were doing business with Target in the beauty space. Target wouldn't talk to them in the baby space because they were doing business with me. You can't just decide you're going to go into the baby space and host events. That just doesn't work. You have to have a trusted source. You have to have a person that's got their face out there. People want to learn this information from people, and Target had that in us. And we were hosting very successful events in their stores nationwide. So that was why they approached me. For me, it was really, I really just wanted this to happen. I was very tired. And so from a money perspective, yes, I wanted to get as much money as possible, but I also needed like my sanity back. At this point, I had 2 kids. I was tired of working around the clock. And I think there's a price that you pay for that. When they came to me for this opportunity, you also have to remember that this isn't a conventional sale. I owned a community. I didn't have assets. I mean, my assets were my email list, my social media, my brand. I mean, I had a couple of computers. I didn't have like real estate. I didn't have
the trust of your community, it sounds like,
yes.
was what it was all about.
And so they bought my company under the notion that we would grow it. And I presented a plan to them as to how we would get to this number that they wanted to get to. And they said to me, this is amazing. You need to look at us as rocket fuel for your business. Like, we're going to give you the money and it's business as usual. And it did not pan out like that. Now, there were a lot of questions I could have and should have asked. I did ask a lot. We had an attorney. There are a lot of things I would have done differently in hindsight. I don't regret it, but from a money perspective, I didn't really think that anyone would just want a community and just would come forth and buy it. Now, the other thing too that I think is really important to point out is I closed on the sale of my company in January of 2019. Had I waited and not sold my business, I would have gotten nothing because everyone in our space went out of business except for us during COVID.
Yeah.
And so at least I got something. And that's really how I look at it, because really and truly, if I would have waited a little bit longer, it wouldn't have been enough time and any deal would have fallen apart during COVID and we would have gone out of business.
Lindsay, that's great. And you should celebrate that. You didn't know that that was coming, but that is something to celebrate. And there's so many questions I'd love to ask, but I want to get to what you're doing now because you're coaching entrepreneurial women who are in their 40s and older, it sounds like. So you're bringing this incredible experience that you've had of the ups and downs of building businesses, selling businesses, and you're talking to them every day about money and running their business. I'd love to hear when you're having conversations with your clients more about how money relates with them and how they're prioritizing investments that might impact them and their family versus the business. It's such a hard balance when you're building a business. And I'm curious how those conversations go.
There are a lot of women who come to me who have businesses that are just kind of like stuck or they've stalled or they've plateaued. And they come to me to help them get out of that. The other women who come to me are just kind of making this pivot and they're entering entrepreneurship. A lot of women come to me for marketing because that's what I do. I am a marketing consultant and that is my strong suit. Money is actually not my strong suit. However, one of the things that I always start with my clients, all of my clients, whether it's a consulting or a mentorship client, is we can do this very simply without a lot of money. I think a lot of women and a lot of entrepreneurs think that you need to have all this funding and this and that, and you need to have like fancy ads and funnels and all this stuff in place to start a business. You do not. And actually, if you don't have the fundamental foundation of marketing in place, you cannot invest in your brand in terms of like ads and fancy tech and fancy funnels. You need to have these basic things in place. And a lot of the women who come to me don't. And so that's what we do. We focus on these very simple marketing tactics like telling your story, creating a good offer, pricing yourself. What does your website look like? Partnerships and events. Those are the easiest, low-cost ways to grow a business. They don't cost a dime. That's how I built my first company. Yes. So it's like if you are worrying about money first and foremost, you're doing it wrong. My whole thing is that you need to build this foundation and you need to build the community around your business. And once you have that community and they trust you, they will end up transacting with you. And then you take the money and you reinvest it back into the business. And I will say, even like with Bump Club and Dear Found Her, I have always reinvested back into the business before I have paid myself, before I have paid anyone else. And actually, I've usually paid other people before I've paid me. So it's funny because I was just on the phone today with a client of mine, and she was telling me how overwhelmed she was. And so we went through, and I said, well, what are some of these things that you can like offload? And what are some of the things that you're doing that you can hire someone else to do? And I will tell you how to do it in a way that you're not paying six figures for an accountant or a CFO or whatever. And that's really what I do with my clients. It's like, I think there's a big misconception that you have to spend a lot of money, and you don't. It's really spending in the right way and making very simple investments back into your brand, like in technology or in a virtual assistant or a fractional employee or a project manager. I mean, these are the investments that you can make into your business that don't cost a lot of money, but when they're in place, you will see results.
I love that creativity and intention. Lindsay, tell us, what is your next money conversation going to be, and who is it going to be with?
My next money conversation is going to be on Friday, and it's going to be with my bookkeeper and my tax accountant. And we are going to look at my year, which I had, thankfully, a really good year. And we're going to decide what my special payroll is that I'm going to run for myself before the end of 2025. So that is my next money conversation, and it's on the books already.
It's such an important conversation that you're going to have. I love you're demonstrating that you actually embrace what you teach. You outsource when you need to. You don't have to do it all yourself. And I think that's an important part of that story. Lindsay, where's the best place for our listeners to find you?
Best place to find me is on Instagram at DearFoundHer, DearFoundHer. I do answer all the DMs there. It's me. Or at www.dearfoundher.com.
What a treat to talk with you, hear your story, your energy. I'm like charged. Thanks for joining us on Money Tales.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening. And leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspiriant.com. See you next time.